Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Terri McAdams. Terri McAdams, a vibrant and active 22-year-old from Arlington, Texas. Since her teenage years, she enjoyed driving around the neighborhoods in her convertible. She often spent time in the city with friends, listening to music. Terri was a bright and popular cheerleader who always drew attention but remained modest and well-mannered. She deeply loved her sisters, Hopper and Pamela, and shared a close bond with all her relatives. Terri acted as a mentor for her sisters, bridging the gap between them and their mother. She enjoyed dancing with them and even taught them how to drive. Everyone who knew Terri described her as a person who loved life. After graduating from high school, she enrolled in the University of Arkansas. Before completing her degree, she decided to move to Arlington to be with her fiancé, Karen Anderson, who was a few years older and had already graduated. After graduation, she planned to start a career and marry Karen, who had proposed to her. Since 1984, local newspapers have been reporting on the murders in the Fort Worth area. During this time, Terri was studying at university and took the threat very seriously. She was genuinely afraid for her life, a concern she shared frequently with Karen and her family. To protect herself, Terri made several significant changes. She quit her well-paying job in Irving, where she had to drive every day and return home in the dark. Understanding the potential danger, she decided it wasn't worth the risk of driving at night. Despite being young and energetic, Terri began to live a very cautious lifestyle. She stopped going out at night, avoided parties, and only left her home during the day when accompanied by Karen. She even felt anxious about going grocery shopping and often called her mother multiple times a day to express her fears. Terri was genuinely worried about the situation, especially since the authorities had not yet identified the criminal, leaving the streets of Arlington feeling unsafe. Around the same time, Texas police formed a task force consisting of experienced experts to investigate a series of violent crimes and prevent further atrocities. They believed that a serial killer, or potentially multiple perpetrators, was active in the area. Terri felt particularly anxious because she fit the profile of the victims. They were all attractive, around her age, and lived nearby. It was difficult for her to cope, but Karen provided strong support. She admitted to her mother and sisters that being alone was the most frightening part. To help her feel safer, Karen decided to leave his job and accept a new high-paying position closer to home, though it occasionally required business trips to nearby cities. During her moments of panic, she limited her outings and rushed home after school. For any important tasks, she aimed to handle them early in the morning and always sought someone to accompany her. On the morning of February 13, 1985, the local police station received a disturbing call. An employee responsible for technical maintenance at the residential complex where Terri lived reported that he was unable to gain access to her apartment. When the police arrived, no one answered the door, and they were unable to reach Terri's relatives. As a result, they decided to speak with local residents. Neighbors confirmed the repairman's account. They also could not contact Terri, but reported hearing suspicious noises coming from her apartment. The police then decided to break down the door to enter her apartment. Inside, they discovered a gruesome scene. Terri's body was found in the bedroom on the bed. She had been raped and brutally beaten with a blunt object. Based on the condition of her body and the blood evidence, it seemed the crime had occurred at night or early in the morning before the police were called. Forensic experts quickly arrived at the scene to begin their investigation. It was clear that there had been a struggle and that Terri had fought back. They found numerous defensive wounds on her arms and upper body, and her face was severely disfigured from a prolonged beating. There were signs of strangulation on her neck, yet the forensic expert believes the attacker did not kill her that way. Instead, she died from a severe head injury. She also suffered brutal rape, but it is unclear whether this occurred before or after her murder. DNA traces were found on her bed linen and underwear, but at that time, it was not possible to identify the owner. The analytical methods were still developing and could not be used in the investigation. Additionally, there were no surveillance cameras or geolocation tracking available. The situation became more complicated when local residents learned about the tragedy and required psychological support. The robbery theory was quickly dismissed, as many valuables were still intact in the apartment, including noticeable items. It was clear that robbery was not the motive. The police began interviewing Terri's friends and relatives, looking for individuals who might have had personal motives, such as jealousy, hatred, or revenge. Terri McAdams was known to be very kind, friendly, and non-confrontational, and none of her relatives could think of anyone who would want to harm her. The police searched the crime scene, but did not find the murder weapon, which forensic experts believe was a hammer or a similar metal tool. They did discover a cigarette butt in the apartment, indicating it likely belonged to the killer. Unfortunately, the technology available at the time was insufficient to extract DNA from the cigarette, and the saliva remnants were too small to analyze. The only useful information obtained was the brand of cigarettes the killer used. One theory being considered is that a serial killer may be responsible for the crimes. Police have investigated Terri's murder alongside other cases in the nearby areas and believe the suspect may not have known the victims, as the attacks appear to have occurred spontaneously. The attacker aimed to avoid detection and leave no evidence behind, so he chose to enter through the back sliding balcony door instead of the main entrance. There were no clear signs of a break-in on the outer window frame. It is probable that he used a tree, growing just a few meters away from the apartment building's wall, to reach the balcony. Unfortunately, aside from these basic observations, the police were unable to gather any useful information. The police spoke with Terri's family, particularly her mother and sisters, who had the closest bond with her. They were understandably shocked by the tragedy. Terri, known for her cheerful demeanor, seemed incapable of having enemies, particularly those who would wish to harm her so cruelly. Disturbingly, it appeared that Terri had a sense of impending danger. She was afraid to leave her home, fearing she might become a victim. Tragically, she was killed in her own apartment. As news of the attack spread throughout the city, the local community began to believe that there was a killer on the loose, capable of breaking into any apartment. They suspected that he might have targeted attractive women, stalking and attacking them. Ultimately, the community felt that no one was safe, especially young women who might be the next targets. Residents decided to take matters into their own hands. Over the next few months, sales of guns and ammunition skyrocketed as more people began arming themselves. Meanwhile, public pressure began to mount on the police for answers. The county sheriff appeared on a local television station, asking anyone with information about the crime to come forward. After Terri's murder was reported on local news, police received numerous calls, but the information did not help the investigation. Initially, Terri's fiancée, Karen, was considered the prime suspect, but he was away on business at the time and had an alibi. The police attempted to include him in the murder profile to close the case and appease public concern, but this was not feasible. Terri's friends found it hard to believe that he could commit such a crime. Once his alibi of being away on business was confirmed, he was removed from the suspect list. Police spoke with Terri's relatives to reconstruct a timeline of events that took place on February 12th. Terri arrived at school around 4 p.m. After leaving the university, she got into her car and drove home. Once home, she changed clothes and went shopping, again alone. although she usually liked to invite her friends along. They were all busy that day. First, she went to the nearest grocery store to buy ingredients for a cake she planned to make for Karan to celebrate Valentine's Day, as he was scheduled to return from his business trip the next morning. Store employees confirmed that they saw Terri at the checkout and even provided a receipt for her purchase. The receipt indicated that she had bought ingredients for baking. They determined that she left the store at around 6:30 p.m. Police questioned anyone who may have seen her at the time, looking for any suspicious behavior, such as someone following her. No one reported anything unusual. It appeared to be a routine shopping trip. Terri paid for her items and walked out. Terri went home and decided not to go out again, as she had scheduled a visit from a repairman the next morning to fix some wiring issues. That evening, none of the neighbors were home, and those who did hear strange noises were unable to fully grasp the seriousness of the situation. The sounds faded relatively quickly, leading people to calm down. Typically, police look for the killer among the victim's close acquaintances. This time, it was not the case. A few months ago, Terri was preparing for her wedding. Karan had given her a valuable engagement ring, but the police were unable to find the ring during their investigation. Initially, it was thought that the ring's disappearance could be attributed to a robbery gone wrong. Further investigation revealed that this theory was unlikely, as nothing else was missing. Given its value, a campaign was launched to find the ring. Approximately 250 flyers featuring a picture of the ring were distributed to local pawnshops, including those in Fort Worth and Dallas, informing them of the missing jewelry. Despite this effort, no one reported the ring to the police. The police followed up on all potential leads, but none of them panned out. All of the suspects questioned provided alibis. The police focused on individuals with a history of violence who lived in the area. The investigation began to stall. Terri's relatives made efforts to promote the case by regularly reaching out to the public through various media channels. They appeared on TV and radio and distributed many flyers, but their efforts yielded no results. Eventually, the murder of Terri McAdams became an unsolved case that was filed away in the archives. Terri's family continued to seek justice, but the police lacked the necessary resources and evidence to advance the investigation. The case went cold for 36 years until 2021, when a team of experienced police and forensic experts was assembled to revisit forgotten cases, utilizing new technologies. Among these cases was that of Terri McAdams. Police used advanced DNA testing methods to re-examine old evidence. Biological material from the perpetrator was found on Terri's underwear and bedsheets. She fought back during the attack, leaving traces of the perpetrator's skin under her fingernails. A cigarette was retrieved from the archives and sent for testing, as the killer's saliva might be on it. This thorough analysis helped create a profile of a likely suspect. When this profile was checked against the database of known offenders, there were no matches. Terri's family hoped to identify the killer who had been on the run for decades. Unfortunately, despite their hopes, the case remained unsolved for many more years. Luckily, the investigation continued and eventually decided to use a new method: genetic genealogy technology, which required the assistance of the FBI. In August 2023, after exploring all possible options, the police department reached out to the Federal Bureau of Investigation in Dallas for help with the Terri McAdams case. They planned to analyze the DNA samples collected from the crime scene and the victim's body. This genetic testing aimed to create a family tree of the suspect, allowing the investigation to extend beyond the existing database, which only included known offenders. By using genealogical research, the police could significantly increase the chances of identifying the suspect's relatives, particularly close ones. This method is considered very effective. At the time of this study, The database had grown to the point where the probability of finding a match was close to 100%. The investigation successfully identified a man named Bernard Sharp, an American who had a notable history with the police in the 1980s. At the time of the crime, Bernard was 30 years old and married. He was also a neighbor of Terri, and Karen had a close relationship with him. Following Bernard's arrest during the investigation, he contacted the police and supported the victim's family. He provided an alibi that the police initially found suspicious. His wife later confirmed his alibi, leading to him being cleared of suspicion. Ultimately, all accusations against him were dismissed, and the investigation continued without results. On the evening of November 3, 1985, a man called the police, claiming to be the brother of Bernard's wife. He reported that he had been shot and needed assistance. After investigating, the police discovered that an armed criminal had attacked him, his sister, and her friend at their home. When the police arrived at the scene, it appeared to be a horrific massacre. He recounted that when he returned home with his sister and her friend, he found Bernard waiting for them with a gun. Bernard opened fire, killing the two women on the spot and wounding his wife's brother. Bernard's wife's brother was injured in the shooting, but managed to escape to a neighbor's house. His injuries were not life-threatening. Bernard may not have expected his wife's brother to be there, and the shooting may have been premeditated. When Bernard realized his plan had failed, he began shooting at people. In addition to the two deceased women, his wife's brother was also found wounded at the scene. Bernard was shot in the head and died from his injuries on November 3, 2008. It is likely that his decision to voluntarily end his life was a factor in the tragic events that unfolded. It is now clear why the attacks on young girls in the city stopped after this tragedy. Bernard was a serial killer. During the investigation, no witnesses came forward to confirm his plans or his connection to the murders of Terri and the other girls. Several close friends of Bernard reported that he knew Terri's killer, but did not disclose his name. Several months after Terri's murder, Bernard was found dead after killing his wife and her friend and seriously injuring his wife's brother. The police were unable to locate his body for an autopsy, so they had to take other measures to determine his connection to the murder of Terri McAdams. They traveled out of state to meet with one of Bernard's registered relatives. Although the man did not want his name linked to the crime, he eventually agreed to provide a DNA sample. Forensic genealogy helped confirm Bernard's guilt. At the time of Bernard's death, the police were unable to compare his DNA with the DNA found at the crime scene and could not establish a connection between his previous attacks. Before killing his relatives, Bernard had only used violence without a firearm. Furthermore, Bernard's fingerprints were not in the police database, which meant that no matches could be found. Given the nature of the attacks, the police suspect he may have been involved in other crimes in his neighborhood. He appears to fit the profile of a serial rapist and murderer. Bernard's criminal record has been turned over to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, an agency known for its crime-solving abilities. There has been no confirmed evidence of his involvement in any other cases. For Terri's family, identifying the killer brought them relief. After 39 years, the case was finally closed. This breakthrough was made possible by new technology. Terri's sisters appeared on a local television channel to share their feelings about the case being solved in several interviews. After nearly 40 years, they conveyed that it would have been better to see justice served in person. They take comfort in knowing that this dangerous criminal stopped his criminal ways long ago and cannot harm anyone again. If he had not stopped, many more innocent women could have fallen victim to him over the years.